step back in time with me, not to the roaring 20s you might imagine, full of flappers and jazz, but to a continent holding its breath. The year is 1926. It's been 8 years since the guns of the Great War fell silent, but the echoes of those shots still reverberate through every street, every home, and every political chamber in Europe. This isn't just a history lesson. It's the story of a fragile peace, a continent trying to rebuild itself on a foundation of ash and memory, teetering between hope for a brighter future and the long dark shadow of the past. Imagine a world where an entire generation of young men is simply gone. Walk through a village in France or a town in Germany, and the absence is a physical presence. The men who are there carry the war with them, some with visible scars, others with wounds no one can see. The term shell shock is now a household phrase, though few truly understand the psychological trauma it represents. For millions, the war never ended. It just moved from the battlefield to their minds. This was the human cost, a debt that could never be repaid, shaping the very soul of Europe in 1926. Politically, Europe was a grand, precarious experiment. New nations had been carved from the old empires: Austria-Hungary, the Ottomans, the Russian Empire, all gone. In their place stood countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and the Baltic states. These were nations born from the principle of self-determination, a dream of President Woodrow Wilson. But drawing lines on a map is one thing. Creating a stable nation is another. These new countries were patchworks of different ethnic groups, languages, and religions, all forced under one flag. In 1926, the question on every diplomat's mind was, could these disparate peoples truly live together, or were these new borders just future battle lines in the making? The old powers were grappling with their new realities. Britain, though victorious, was exhausted, its empire vast but its coffers empty. The cost of the war had been staggering, and the social unrest at home, including the massive general strike of 1926, showed just how strained the fabric of society had become. France, having borne the brunt of the fighting on the Western Front, was obsessed with one thing: security. They wanted to ensure Germany could never, ever threaten them again. This fear drove French policy, leading them to build alliances, the so-called Little Entente, and to occupy German industrial regions when reparations weren't paid. And then there was Germany, the defeated power, now the Weimar Republic. This was a nation in turmoil, stripped of its colonies, its military neutered, and saddled with crushing war reparations by the Treaty of Versailles. Many Germans felt a deep sense of national humiliation. Hyperinflation in the early 20s had wiped out the savings of the middle class, creating economic despair. By 1926, things had stabilized somewhat thanks to American loans under the Dawes Plan. A period of relative prosperity, known as the Golden Twenties, had begun. Berlin became a global center for art, culture, and science. It was a city of incredible creativity and shocking decadence, a vibrant but chaotic symbol of a nation at war with itself. But underneath this glittering surface, the resentment simmered. Extremist parties on both the left and the right, including a small but growing Nazi party led by an Austrian corporal named Adolf Hitler, were feeding on this bitterness. This fragile stability was best symbolized by the Locarno Treaties, signed just a year earlier in 1925, on the shores of a Swiss lake. The leaders of Germany, France, Belgium, Britain, and Italy came together. Germany formally accepted its new western borders with France and Belgium. It felt like a new dawn. For the first time since the war, the former enemies were talking, cooperating. The spirit of Locarno swept across Europe, a wave of optimism that maybe, just maybe, lasting peace was possible. Germany was even admitted to the League of Nations in 1926, taking its seat alongside the victors. It seemed the world was healing, but even this spirit of hope was built on shaky ground. The Locarno Treaties did nothing to guarantee Germany's eastern borders with Poland and Czechoslovakia. This was a deliberate omission, a crack in the foundation of peace that would later be exploited. The League of Nations itself, the world's great hope for preventing future wars, was a toothless tiger. It had no army to enforce its decisions, and a major world power, the United States, had refused to join, retreating into isolationism. Its power was based on moral authority, but what good was morality against a nation determined on aggression? Meanwhile, in Italy, a different vision for the future was taking hold. Benito Mussolini and his fascist party were firmly in control. Il Duce was consolidating his power, crushing opposition, and promoting an aggressive, expansionist nationalism. His model, a totalitarian state built on militarism and the cult of the leader, was being watched closely by others across Europe who were disillusioned with democracy. In 1926, Mussolini was seen by some as a strong leader who made the trains run on time, but his ideology was a direct challenge to the liberal democratic order that the Locarno spirit was trying to build. And far to the east, the Soviet Union was a giant, enigmatic presence. After the death of Lenin, a power struggle was underway. Joseph Stalin was methodically outmaneuvering his rivals, including Leon Trotsky. By 1926, Stalin was on the cusp of absolute power, ready to launch his brutal 5-year plans to industrialize the nation at a terrifying human cost. For the rest of Europe, the USSR was both a pariah state and a source of revolutionary fear. The The specter of communism haunted the halls of power in London, Paris, and Berlin, influencing political decisions and fueling right-wing movements who presented themselves as the only bulwark against the Red Menace. So, 1926 was a year of profound contradictions. It was a time of jazz and artistic innovation, but also of deep-seated trauma and political extremism. It was a time of international cooperation and treaties, but also of simmering resentments and unresolved conflicts. It was the spirit of Locarno versus the rise of fascism. It was the Weimar Republic's golden age, built on the quicksand of American loans and national humiliation. Europe was dancing on the edge of a volcano. People desperately wanted to believe in peace, to forget the horrors of the trenches and build a new world. They signed pacts, held conferences, and talked of disarmament. But the economic and psychological scars of the Great War ran too deep. The Treaty of Versailles had created as many problems as it solved. The new nations were unstable. The old empires were gone, but the imperial mindset was not. The world was becoming interconnected as never before, particularly economically, meaning a crash in one country could now drag everyone else down with it. And that's exactly what was about to happen. Just 3 years later, the Wall Street crash of 1929 would pull the rug out from under the global economy, destroying the fragile prosperity of the Weimar Republic and creating the perfect storm for extremism to thrive. The peace of 1926 was not a true peace. It was a ceasefire. It was an intermission between two acts of a great European tragedy. The seeds of the Second World War were all there, quietly sprouting in the soil of the First. The unresolved grievances, the economic fragility, the rise of totalitarian ideologies, it was all present in 1926, hidden just beneath a thin veneer of hope. Looking back, we see not a decade of peace, but a 10-year countdown to an even greater catastrophe. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to 1926. It's a crucial reminder that peace is never guaranteed. It must be constantly and carefully nurtured. If you found this deep dive into history interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments what other historical moments you'd like to explore. See you next time.